Hey friends, it's Laura. Today is going to be a Hoya day. I'm going to be going through my entire Hoya collection, talking a little bit about each plant, but also just seeing if they need to be repotted. I am changing a little bit my Hoya care. My Hoyas are not growing as much as I feel like they could. So I'm going to be talking about that as I repot, as I sort of baby the plants to get them ready for spring. My Hoyas had a really rough year and I want them to kind of have a fresh start as we go into spring and hopefully get a little bit of growth, maybe a few more blooms this year. So if you're into that, stay tuned. I'm gonna do all my repotting in the plant room. Sometimes I make a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. So I'm just gonna go through and collect all of my Hoyas. You will notice that my Hoyas are not all in the cabinet anymore. That is a big change for my collection. I decided that while the cabinet offers a lot of humidity, the lights in there are not as bright as the lights I have out here. And so I think some of the lack of growth might actually just be a lack of foot candles of light. I have really nice grow lights in there. They're just not very bright and they're kind of better suited to the alocation and anthurium that I have in there. And that's just kind of the reality of those grow lights. If I had stronger grow lights in the cabinet, I would be burning my alocasia and anthurium. So you kind of just have to choose what you're gonna do. This grow light here is ridiculously strong. Like, it has burned some of my succulents. However, the Hoyas love it. They get a bit of sun stress sometimes, but they do not burn under this grow light. So I'm gonna try it. I didn't move all of them out of the cabinet, but quite a few of them are just out here and hopefully they will like it out here. Obviously, the humidity out here is not as high as the cabinet, but what can you do? Here's the cabinet now. Not a lot of Hoyas in here, but I do still have these two. And honestly, I put these in here because I felt like they didn't need as much light as the other ones. So they can just benefit from the humidity, but not necessarily need as much bright light as these other guys. Also, these Hoyas were very small, so I had space for them in the cabinet. I also have this little stick of a Hoya and this little stick of a Hoya. I'm gonna just leave those there. I know that they don't need to be repotted or anything. My Hoya australis is in rough shape. It's back here. This is all that's left of my Hoya australis, but I'll bring it over to the table so I remember to talk about it. I always forget about my Hoya curtisii, of course. This guy is getting huge. I know I said I was gonna repot in the plant room, but now there's some beautiful sunshine happening on my dining room table and I would rather sit in the sun. This has been a very gray winter, which I know I've mentioned so many times, but I'm actually gonna repot on the table. I feel like the plants will look so much more beautiful and I will feel happier because I'll be sitting in the sun. So I'm just gonna move them all over here. All right, all of the Hoya friends are over here, and I just wanna say that probably seemed really ridiculous to move all of the Hoyas over here if you do not live in an area that gets really gray in the winter. It was so gray this winter that anytime there's a bit of sun, I try to soak it up. So if you think that's silly, maybe you are not living in the same reality as I am. I'm going to be repotting, or at least sort of looking inside the soil of most of these just to make sure that we are all good. But some of these I know for sure do not need a repot, so I'm gonna just talk about those quickly and kind of get them out of the way. This is my Hoya ranuensis, and I got this in an import from Green Spaces, and I love this Hoya so much. It hasn't given me any new growth yet, but I'm not gonna be repotting it because I did repot it after the sulfur treatment, so I do know that it's got enough space in there, it's gonna be okay. And I've got it in this little nursery pot, and the nursery pot is in this little plant pot that I made. It's got mushrooms on it. And then it's on this little homemade trellis as well. I think this one is set up for success. I am going to be watering it a little bit more this spring. I think maybe I haven't been watering it enough. I've been waiting for these leaves to get soft and they never do. So I just need to water a little bit more, but I think the pot situation is totally fine. My Hoya Chelsea, I recently snipped the tip off and propagated it and repotted it in here. So I know for sure that this plant is fine. It doesn't have a ton of space, but it doesn't have a really extensive root system at the moment either. Haven't seen any growth from this. There is some new growth coming in there. I was not aware of that until right this second. So there is some new growth there. And as I'm tipping the plant, I see that there's a little bit of new growth starting there. So that is super exciting. Nothing new on the propagation yet, but that's really exciting. But I do not need to repot this one today. This is my Hoya carnosa Crimson Princess, and I think it got root rot during the sulfur treatment situation. So I am just re-rooting it in water. But obviously, as you can see, the roots are really tiny, but it is rooting up. But today I will not be potting it up. Obviously, it needs a little bit more time in the water. Now my Hoya australis is kind of the same story. I don't know what happened with this plant. I love this plant so much. It was so big and mature when I bought it, and then it just slowly went downhill. I do know that for a while I wasn't really giving it enough light. I kind of thought it would be fine because it was so mature, but I was wrong. So I think because it wasn't getting a ton of light, it got root rot, maybe, I'm not sure. I really hope this plant makes it. I really love the australis. I feel pretty disappointed in myself that this is all that's left, but what can you do? I'm not gonna let that get me down too much. And then my Hoya macrophylla, I do not think needs a repot. I did repot it after the sulfur treatment, so it's good to go. It's again on one of these little homemade trellises, and I decorated this little pot with some polymer clay. So I think it's good to go, but this plant as well, I don't think I've been watering it enough, so I'm going to be really holding myself to watering all of my Hoyas more. I've been doing some research. I think that I was watering my Hoyas way less than I should have been. I've been waiting until the leaves get soft and flimsy, and I think that that really was internet advice that was not correct, because the more I learn about Hoyas, the more I learn that they should be watered quite a bit more than that, basically as soon as the soil is really dry. So I'm gonna be upping my watering by a lot this spring, well, starting now, and hoping that I see some more growth. But I'm not gonna repot this guy today either. My Hoya carnosa green does not need to be repotted because I did just do exactly what I did with those other Hoyas. I had to cut it. I think it got root rot from the sulfur treatment. And so I chopped it and propagated it, and already we have some new growth here. This is one of the propagations that's putting out new growth. So this guy is doing great, but does not need to be repotted today. This is my Hoya ranuensis, and I have it in this beautiful lavender lilac pot. This pot is from Terrestrial, by the way. They have really beautiful pots, but I just recently put it was in like a nursery pot in this pot, and then I repotted it into this pot, if that makes sense. So it's fine. It's got a drainage hole at the bottom. It is good to go. And I think it just looks so beautiful in this pot. So I'm definitely not going to be changing this setup at all today. So now what's left over are these, and this is still quite a bit to repot or at least check out. So I'm gonna get started. Just doing my laundry, so if you hear weird laundry noises, that is all that's going on. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be repotting those that need it, but all of these plants that are on the table, I'm gonna just be checking out what's going on underneath the soil. Now, I did mention that I'm going to just be sort of upping my game when it comes to Hoyas. Until now, I have been kind of following the rule that you should never repot Hoyas. You should barely water the Hoyas ever. I think I'm gonna just dump my soil back into my bin because I know that none of these plants have pests. I've been following all those rules that are kind of like the classic rules that you find on the internet, and it hasn't really been working for me. So that is why I'm kind of changing up what I'm doing. Now my Hoya carrii, as you know, is kind of like the bane of my Hoya existence. It has such healthy roots though right now. I feel like we're gonna have some growth this spring. There are some little growth points right here, and that is so exciting to me. This plant never grows, but I'm going to be upping the game. So what I mean by upping the game is making sure that my Hoyas, oh my goodness, there's another growth point right there. Okay, so I'm doing something right. So when I say changing how I care for Hoyas, I mean basically not following all of those rules that I read on the internet. There are a lot of roots. There is some moss in here still, but this is a lot of roots. I am gonna up-pot this plant. That soil was blocking my sun. There we go. So one of the rules that I was following really strictly was to let my Hoya get root bound. And while I don't think that is like the worst advice, I don't think that you need to be repotting constantly, again, at least from what I can see. But I don't think that you need to let it get really tight and root bound. If it's gonna grow, it's gonna need more space. So that is why I'm doing all this repotting today. I wanna get them ready for spring. I wanna make sure that they are able to grow if they would like to, which I hope they would like to. And there. I'm trying to kind of position them so that the growth points are facing up and that they will grow as much as possible. Okay. All right, that one done. Now, the next guy that I want to look into is this Hoya compacta. Now, I'm repotting this plant because it does not grow ever, and I believe the soil is fairly hydrophobic. There is some little growth points that appeared after the sulfur treatment. I don't know if you can see right there, there's a little growth point. They appeared after the sulfur treatment. There was a couple new leaves, but really I feel like for the size of this plant, it should be growing a lot more often. I'm gonna repot it a little bit. You'll also notice that when possible, I am repotting into plastic pots instead of into bigger terracotta pots. From what I've kind of gleaned, and this is from my experience, not just from like watching other people, but it does seem like the Hoya roots like to cling to porous materials. And so that would include terracotta pots. Okay, and this soil I think is like really, oh yeah, this plant was definitely ready to be repotted. And I think a lot of this soil is the original soil that this plant came in, and it feels so crusty and not great. I'm not gonna remove all of it so that I don't damage the roots, but I am gonna just kind of dust it off. So to avoid roots kind of clinging to the pot, I don't know if you can see, but there is like little bits of root stuck to the pot. And I've noticed that when I repot Hoyas and they were in terracotta, that is often the case. There's like little bits of roots in there. I just really don't like the idea that I have to rip off a little bit of root every time I want to repot. So I'm gonna stick with plastic pots. These are just nursery pots that plants came in when I bought them. I like to just keep them, like wash them out and keep them for when another plant needs a new home. So that is another thing that I am changing with my Hoya care this year, is when possible, not repotting into terracotta and just making sure that plants just have enough room to grow. I wonder if this would actually still fit into this cover pot. Not quite, not quite. It will need a new home. All right, we might as well tackle the Publicalyx while I'm at it. This plant, like the terracotta is stuck in this cover pot, and I really don't love this cover pot, but the terracotta is just stuck in there. And so I have just left it. This plant is putting out new growth a little bit, but I've had this plant for so long, I feel like it probably is root bound in here, but I just haven't wanted to deal with the pot situation. But as I'm digging in here, the plant does seem a little bit loose, so maybe this isn't going to be a big deal at all. Oh. Okay, so this definitely wasn't root bound. The soil does look really kind of crusty dusty though. I'm trying to think if I put this into new soil when I got it, and I really can't remember. I do remember buying this from a big box store though, so probably the soil was not ideal. Yeah, it feels really dry in here, but the roots are still alive. But speaking of dryness, I have decided upon lots of research that I have been underwatering my Hoyas. So I have really stuck to that sort of, what is it, taco test, that when your Hoyas are dehydrated enough that you can fold the leaves like a taco, it's time to water and to wait until then. And if you don't wait until then, you're probably going to overwater your Hoyas and cause root rot. And I've really been scared of root rot, so I have not been watering a lot. And I'll talk about root rot though. And I did experience root rot this year with Hoyas, so that's kind of ironic. But I've really been sticking to that. And that rule just, I don't know, I learned it online and I really stuck to it because it seemed really simple to follow. It was easy to remember then. I would just always check the leaves. But I think in that, while my plants did not die of root rot, I don't think they had enough water to grow regularly and vigorously. So I'm now going to be watering whenever the soil is like bone dry. So it was kind of like two stages. The soil will get bone dry and then the leaves would dehydrate. Instead, I'm going to just water when the soil is dry. And hopefully I do not kill all of my Hoyas from root rot, but we'll see. Okay, that one's good to go. So that one I didn't really get into a bigger pot, but at least it's got nice fresh soil now. Here's my Hoya Wyetii, and you can see this one has put out some new growth recently. But again, the soil in this one just looks really gross and dusty and old. So we're gonna refresh that. I think I can probably, just looking at the roots here, I can probably just keep it in the same side. Oh, here's the problem. Here's the problem. This is why this plant isn't growing. It is still in this plug, which I'm gonna rip off. So the roots do grow through these mesh plugs. Like there is roots outside of it, but I find it really restricts the growth. I really wish nurseries would not use these mesh plugs. Like apparently they're biodegradable, they dissolve in the soil, but I've had this plant in my house for at least 3 years and who knows how long it was growing before I bought it. So if it takes that long to disintegrate, I really don't think that's in like the best interest of the plant. So very glad I'm repotting this guy. I feel like I'm gonna get so much growth now. And so yeah, the roots are not that big, probably because of that stupid mesh thing. And the soil on here is so hydrophobic or dusty, or I don't even know. Probably has a lot of peat moss in it, which I find is not great. So yeah, obviously I never repotted this plant because that's another sort of thing, is that you should just leave Hoyas in the pot they come in that you get from the store. Do not disturb the roots whatsoever. And that is the best way to get them to grow, to make sure they don't die. And I have followed that blindly, obviously. And that's just not helpful because you don't know what's going on underneath the soil. So that's something I have learned just through experience. I mean, right now I have, but with other newer Hoyas that I brought home, I've found that it is better just to repot them into some fresh soil that you know that plants will enjoy, that you know doesn't have a whole bunch of peat moss in it, etc. And you can of course remove any netting or things like that that might be going on. By the way, the soil I'm using today is Molly's aeroid mix mixed with some organic soil. So the Molly's aeroid mix is a soilless mix and I love it. I use it for my philodendrons and my alocasia and they adore it. I find though for Hoyas, I don't know, I personally feel like they need a little bit of soil. So I do just mix a little bit of organic potting soil into the Molly's aeroid mix, if that makes sense. But I do adore the Molly's. That is kind of like what I use. I find it's more convenient than buying all the different pieces, and also the price is really good. So I just get that. I also do have a discount code I will put that below this video if you're interested in trying a new potting mix. I find it's really versatile for different types of plants, etc. Okay, now here we have my Hoya Carnosa Crimson Queen, and this plant has not grown in a really long time, which is why I'm repotting it. I did take some cuttings, which should be here. Oh yeah. So I did take some cuttings and they have rooted up, so I'm going to be including them in the pot. Oh, did just one of them root up? No, they both rooted up. So I'm gonna be including those in the pot and hoping that we just get a lot more growth. I feel like this plant should be quite fast growing, but it just isn't. So now that I know that it's not flat mites because I doused my plants with sulfur, if that's not the reason they're not growing, then what is the reason? And it must be that they just want fresh soil and want more water. So that is what I'm going to be doing. Just making sure that we don't have any death plugs on this one. We don't. But again, these roots are not that big. I mean, this one has bigger roots. But for, you know, I've had this plant for maybe 3 years and there's barely any roots. I was expecting a lot more roots. Anyway, that's okay. So that was in terracotta. I'm not gonna up pot it, but I'm gonna just switch it over to plastic to avoid root damage in the future. I find too with this particular plant, because it's a trailing plant, or because it's long enough to be trailing, it was kind of inching towards the edge of the pot, which is okay, but not ideal. So repotting it kind of gives you the chance to reposition everything, make sure that all of the roots have soil and that it can grow as well as possible. Oh, this little Hoya carrii, which has the new growth, so we want to be careful with it. It just kind of popped out of the pot. There we go. Oops. Okay, and then I'm going to add in the cuttings. And this one does have a little new leaf starting, 2 new leaves starting, which is great. And as basic as the Crimson Queen is, and by basic I mean common as it is still definitely like one of my favorite Hoyas because of the pink growth. And maybe that's really silly, but it's just how I feel. I love the pink leaves. Okay, that one is good to go, and I think I could put this guy in here. I think that would look pretty. Will kind of support. Will support the new growth as it comes in. This guy, my Hoya, this is my Hoya Croniana Super Silver, and I got this pretty recently and I was so excited about it, and then it immediately went downhill and I still don't really know what happened. And there was some spider webs on the plant when I got it, but there was no actual spider mites or any evidence of spider mites, but then it immediately went downhill. So I did snip it, I treated it for pests, I have re-rooted it. I'm now gonna pot it up, and I think I'm gonna just snip off all of the old leaves because the old leaves are still puckered and they don't look great and they're probably gonna die anyway. Whereas if I snip now, the plant will kind of regenerate itself quicker, I would hope. I don't even know what's going on with this cutting. So they didn't all root up, but I'll pot up what has roots and then just let the other ones root up. Hopefully they do. This one I'm gonna put in a really tiny pot. Okay, like really tiny. But that way I can kind of keep an eye on the roots. So yeah, I suspect spider mites because of the webbing, and maybe like they were already treated, that's why I didn't see any, but they had done damage. But when I bought it, it looked like it was in really good condition. So I don't know, it's hard to know when you're getting a plant from a nursery. You really have no idea what went on. And this is a nursery I really enjoy. I'm not faulting them, but it was too bad because I was so excited to finally have this plant. It's been on my wish list for a really long time. But sometimes when you, oh, okay, this is a mess. I'm gonna restart. Sometimes when you go through it with a plant like that, you kind of get more attached because you know exactly what it has gone through and you baby it a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't snip off all this growth. As I'm looking at it, it doesn't look as bad as it did, which maybe it's because the leaves now have access to water because of the new roots. And these do not have roots, right? Well, this one has the beginning of roots. This cutting looks terrible. These two, honestly, I think I might just, oh yeah, this one has roots. We will see. I don't want to throw out too much because this was such a beautiful full plant when I got it. Seems like such a waste to start over, but that is life. I think I'm gonna just trim this one because this one looks really bad. I don't know what happened. And there's like some type of damage on the leaves. Honestly, I don't even know what's going on with that. This one looks okay. All right, let's hope this grows. This is my Hoya curtisii. Now this plant grows so fast, but there are roots coming out the bottom. So I do want to give it a bigger pot. I don't know that I have a lot of bigger terracotta, but this is the only bigger plastic pot I have. It's not great, but it'll work. It's quite a bit deeper, so this plant can really root in. I am excited to see how big this curtisii gets this spring. I repotted it maybe 6 months ago, 6 months to a year, and it just exploded with growth then. And this is all good soil, I know that because I repotted it, but it exploded with growth. Woo, and now needs to be repotted again. Just gonna transfer that right in, and this guy is in the Molly's mix. I remember that, and I can recognize all the little bits in there because it's so chunky. So it really enjoyed the soil. It really enjoyed being up potted, and I can't wait to see how big it gets this year. I did think it would spread out more, but it's kind of still just like contained to the center. I don't know if you can see, but it's all just kind of like in this column of roots, even though it had a wider pot. But maybe it just likes to grow like that and then trail over. Break it up a little bit, but not aggressively. There we go. Okay, so that one's very exciting. And then last but not least is my Hoya retusa. And this kind of also goes with the Hoya myths that I've been blindly following, is that if it blooms, it's happy. And this one has bloomed quite a few times, but I was looking at the soil and the soil is horrible. And like, it's so dry in here and it obviously needs to be repotted. And I I want this to grow. It has tons of yellow leaves. Like, I don't think it's doing well. And yes, it blooms, but it does not bloom as profusely as it used to, which to me means that, oh yeah, see there's a little bloom right there. But I just think if it's blooming less than it used to, it's obviously less happy than it used to be, I would think, according to, you know, just common sense. But yeah, that's another sort of little myth. And this soil is so gross, it's so dry. But just get rid of all this crusty, dusty soil. Oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Actually, I don't know. If I put it like this, it will have lots of room at the bottom to grow in. And it will be nice fresh soil. So we'll start with that. Obviously, I can repot whenever. It's kind of with my never repot Hoyas. Every time I did repot, I was like, this is the last time I'll repot you ever. And so I was always trying to be so careful with, you know, making sure it would have enough. Look at this big chunk of orchid bark, I'm assuming. Every time I repotted, I just sort of felt like, oh, this is the last time I'll ever repot, or last time I'll repot for like 5 years. So I was always being so careful. But, you know, if I can repot, I can repot. Okay, I think that's all of them. Now I'm gonna water all of the Hoyas. So I'm gonna move you over to the sink and talk about what I'm gonna be doing with that. So I've just loaded all of the Hoyas in here, the ones I repotted and the ones I didn't repot. And I'm gonna rinse them off really well and give them a really thorough watering. I find when I repot, the leaves kind of get covered in soil. So good to kind of rinse them off, make sure they're nice and clean. That also, of course, helps with pest management. I didn't see any pests when I was repotting, thank goodness. So I'm gonna give them a really thorough watering and then I'm gonna fertilize them. The roots seemed so dry on the ones I was repotting. I feel like they just need sort of a double dose of water, and then I'll add the fertilizer in after. I've been really trying to rinse my Hoyas whenever I water them because there is still a little bit of like sulfur powder on some of them. But I also just wanted to give them a really thorough watering because I repotted them. I try to water everything really thoroughly after repotting because the water helps the soil kind of settle into all of the little holes, all of the little air pockets that may have been created when I was repotting. Gonna just let these sort of settle and drip off a little bit and mix up the fertilizers. I like to experiment with lots of different fertilizers. I like to see which fertilizers actually give any difference or any results to my plants. I have not used instant plant food a lot on my Hoyas, but I have used it a couple times, and but I have been using this almost every time I water my philodendrons and alocasias, and they are doing incredible. They're putting out new leaves all the time. So I'm gonna try it with my Hoyas. Like I said, I've tried it like once or twice, but as I said, my Hoyas are not growing a lot anyway, so maybe now that they have actual space for their roots to absorb nutrients, we'll have better luck. I was a little bit skeptical about instant plant food when I first got it, just because the packaging's so cutesy, and this is terrible, but I find sometimes really cutesy things don't work as well for plants. Maybe, I don't know. But I have found that this is incredible. It's really convenient. You just drop it in your water, you wait a minute, and it's good to go. And now I'm gonna give these guys a big thorough drink. I think by pre-watering before you fertilize, especially after repotting, you are kind of protecting the roots from taking up too much fertilizer, which could lead to burning. I haven't found any issue with fertilizer burn with the instant plant food, but again, I'm babying these plants, getting them ready for spring, so I'm gonna be extra careful. And I kind of wish I could do some type of foliar spray or something today, especially while they're all in the sink like this. But after doing sulfur treatment, you actually aren't supposed to use any oil-based sprays or anything on the leaves until the sulfur is completely gone. And as I said, I am still finding sulfur all of the time on the leaves. So I'm not gonna do that today. I'm gonna give them a really good rinse after I fertilize, just because I'm sure some of the fertilizer has gone on the leaves. But I'm not going to be spraying it down with any foliar spray or anything. I'm now gonna just let all these beauties drip dry. Once they're dried off enough, I'm gonna put them back into their cover pots and put them back into their little spot in my home. I talked a lot about the sulfur treatment. The video for the sulfur treatment is right here if you're interested. I think sulfur can be really useful to Hoyas, but I made a few mistakes that I hope no one makes because I did lose some Hoyas. So if you're interested, have a look. And otherwise, have a wonderful day, guys, and hope to see you in my next video. Bye.